Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Sauro. I'm the Assistant Director for Career and Employer Engagement at Magna Center. I'm also the career coach for the School of Vision Media and Performing Arts. So if you are film, TV, music, journalism, art, you would come and speak with me. And we're also joined by Cron 4 news anchor, reporter, and Brooklyn College alumnus, Dan Thorn. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. Really do appreciate it, all the way out from San Francisco.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Glad to speak with students on what could be a very rewarding career. It's been a fun ride. Haven't been back to Brooklyn College in close to a decade, but good to be here and share some knowledge and some insight into the business.
I appreciate it. And I've been working with some of the students that are here in the chat or here in attendance. And again, I think you being able to provide advice in terms of what to expect in the industry, it just helps people make an informed decision about broadcast journalism and more. So for the students that are here, you can add questions in the chat. Everyone's muted, but you can put questions in the chat, and myself and Marwa are going to ask Dan several questions. And once we're done with those, we can open it up to the questions in the chat. So let's just start. Dan, again, Brooklyn College alumnus, class of 2012. I remember meeting you, if I remember correctly, it was 2010, 2011. We had at the time, this is of course pre-pandemic, and I think we're slowly getting back to in-person drop-in hours. Now, for those that don't know what drop-in hours are, those were times where students would come in during specific times where we were free, and we would just meet with students and go over their resume. And am I correct? It was Wednesdays, I think you'd come by. I think it was on Wednesdays, and young Dan Thorn comes in and says, "I'm going to be a news anchor." And I said, "I love that ambition, man." Like, that's really great. And when it happened. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, how did you decide to choose journalism, and what was your inspiration to kind of get into the field?
Yeah, I mean, I finally remember the good times at the Magna Center, just, being aggressive and wanting to take New York by storm, right? I would say for anybody that wants to get into TV news, being aggressive and being competent are so valuable, and also being compassionate and getting into this business and staying successful in it as well. It was just something I always wanted to do. When I found out that I wasn't going to be a baseball player, I got into journalism. I got into sports. So I worked with the high school paper. And I remember we were getting ready to develop a television station at our high school. I went to high school in the Hudson Valley in a town called Newburgh, New York. So Newburgh Free Academy was where I went to high school. When we started the TV station, I was one of the anchors, so to speak, where we pretty much just did the morning announcements. And I really enjoyed doing that. Like, I just sort of had what I felt was like a natural groove into what it was that I was doing. And other people were acknowledging that, and they were saying, "Hey, you should pursue this as a career." And I was like, well, I've done so much, with like writing and journalism, like I might want to do sports journalism, something like that. And they were like, no, you should pursue TV. You should do it. It's probably a little bit more lucrative as well, right? So, I stuck with it. And as soon as I got out of high school, I went to community college at Rockland Community College. And while I was there, I sent about 1,000 emails to the news director of a local cable station in Middletown, New York. Eventually, they answered me. The news director called me in, and I went and met with him. And he said, "Oh, so you are Yankees fan 3189 at AOL.com," sending me all these emails. So any advice to anybody out there that's applying for a job, not that I think that this is a problem anymore, but it was, 10, 15 years ago, was people when they had email accounts, it was, whatever, like sports fan 31 or, Mets fan, whatever. Like, if you have that as your email address, get rid of that and just have it be your name, especially if you're trying to be taken, you're going to be taken seriously by somebody. Anyway, long story short, I ended up interning there. I wasn't receiving college credit at the time. I was sort of just shadowing, and it was a very small television station, but I got an opportunity to get on air there at 19 years old, which is unusual. It was around the 2008 presidential election, which was historic. First African-American becomes the president of the United States, which was awesome. I did sort of like a 2.5-year plan at RCC, graduated with an associate's degree, transferred to Brooklyn College. And when at Brooklyn, I just aggressively started pounding the pavement. Anytime I saw an opportunity that could be out there, or whoever the human resources person was, or the news director or whatever, I would just send them information. Hey, I want to be an intern here. I want to be an intern here. I want to be an intern here. And that was all of them. New York 1, CBS 2, Channel 7, Channel 4, Fox 5, Fox News Channel, MSNBC. Because when you're in Brooklyn and when you're in New York, you're in the center of the universe, essentially, especially when it comes to broadcast news. So you have all these different places that you could put your resume into, that you can make contacts with, and hopefully somebody knows somebody, and you can get your foot in the door doing whatever. Maybe you don't even want to get into journalism. Maybe you want to get into sales, or with the digital age now, maybe you get into something with websites or whatever. So I mean, I just stuck with it and was really persistent about getting internships, getting into newsrooms, and doing things in New York, in the New York media scene. And it's just been fun. It's something I can't see myself doing, even as things are changing so rapidly. And I've been on air almost a decade now. It's just been so much fun. And I just, I'm sticking with it for now, and we'll see what comes down the road.
That's really great. I mean, again, you took advantage of the Magna Center. I remember, like I said, you'd come in and we worked on your resume, and we were talking about internships, and you did quite a few, right? I'm looking at your LinkedIn now, right? So WABC TV, right? You were at the assignment desk there as an intern, and then you did explore at New York One the sports internship too.
I did a sports internship because I was still sort of trying to figure out exactly what it was that I was going to do. Because frankly, when I was at WABC, or before I got an internship at WABC, I interviewed for 2 different positions there. I interviewed for a sports position and I interviewed for a news position, and I got both of them. And I had an opportunity to go with either one. And I was still sort of torn at the time. One of the biggest issues was, if I was going to pursue a career in sports, did I know enough about all the sports, right? Like I would sometimes get intimidated talking with my buddies about all the things that they would know and how scoring worked and how this, that, and the other thing, because when you work at a place like ESPN or whatnot, of course there are all these different shows that are out there now, NBA TV type shows. There are NFL specialized shows. There's Major League Baseball specialized shows and all of that. But back when I was in high school, ESPN was literally like Sports Center, and then Sports Center looped for until they did another live newscast. So, and those guys or women knew everything, right? They knew how to talk golf. They knew how to talk tennis. They knew all of that stuff. And I was like, man, I don't know if I know all of those things. And I got intrigued by news because I was like, wow, maybe I could do a little bit more, where I could also do sports and also do things that are interesting within the community and in the world. So I continued on more so with news than I did sports. But again, I sort of was intimidated by both sides. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, and then finally made that decision as to what I was going to do.
But you made an informed decision. That's the thing that's really interesting. And I tell students here, and then the others that I meet, doing internships help you kind of like make an informed decision about a specific career path. And you did what was best for you, which is great. So, and there are some students here that have an interest in sports journalism, and again, this is something I wanted people to understand, right? So, doing an internship and hearing from people that have kind of gone down that road, and then what made you make that decision is great. So, and I remember too, you were like you said before, you were networking a lot, and I remember that you definitely had a lot of really great mentors. It was at ABC, I believe, right? So, right. So then. And I know that we probably talked about this too, about New York being super competitive. What was it like to kind of get into local news, but then also talking about how to leave the New York market? Like, would you leave the New York market, and what were the the kind of factors that led you to make that decision as well.
Sure. So, it's an old cliche, but it's true. I mean, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I mean, it's very fast paced. There's a lot of breaking news. There's a lot of situations where people aren't going to take you by the hand and guide you to where you need to go. You have to you got to follow your gut, and you got to be ready to rock and roll. I mean, when you're in a high pressure newsroom like WABC, for example, I was at the assignment desk begging them every day to go out and go do something. And most of the time they're blowing me off like, hey, kid, we got stuff to worry about. We got the chopper up in the air over a crash and, on the FDR. And we've also got a fire in the subway system right now. Like, we don't have time to deal with you and what you want to do. So, you can't let that get to you. It's not personal. It's just that they are trying to do their job, and also got this kid who's bugging them, yanking on their coattail, going, hey, I want to get out. I want to get out. New York is extremely competitive in that sense. And when you're, trying to be number one, or trying to be the best, or trying to be the first, that sort of comes with the territory, is that you soon realize that you have to develop a thick skin in this business. It's visually critical. It is, at times, your viewers can be critical. Your boss can be critical. Things I think have also changed over the last decade. There's been more of an open-mindedness and an understanding as to how people should be communicating with each other and whatnot. So I feel like there are some changes, positive changes, that have happened in the newsroom where people aren't quite belittled like they used to be. And I think that happens, in multiple industries. But anyway, in terms of getting out of New York, the reason why was because I was looking for an opportunity somewhere where I can grow and, be better. There are people out there that could start in New York, and if you've got it and you can do it, great, awesome, amazing, but they are few and far between. So I had to look for opportunities that were outside of New York, and that doesn't necessarily mean outside of the state of New York, just outside of New York City. You may have to start in Elmira. You may have to start in a place like Albany or Rochester or Plattsburgh or somewhere like that. And it's so that you can make mistakes, because when you make mistakes on a really big stage, everybody's going to see it. It's going to be a problem. People aren't going to understand. Your boss isn't going to understand. The people you're working with aren't going to understand. So you want to make mistakes in smaller places so that you could get comfortable, so that when you do eventually get to that big stage, the mistakes are, very minimal, and, you will be more on top of it, and you will be more prepared to handle what's going to be thrown at you, because it gets harder the higher that you climb. Yes, sometimes there are more bodies that are involved, photographers or editors or bosses or whatnot, but in a situation like I'm in right now, a lot of what I do is dependent on what I can deliver. I work as an MMJ here in San Francisco, and for people who don't know what that means a multimedia journalist. So a lot of the time I'm shooting, writing, and editing all of my own stuff, and driving myself to the scene. So I'm my photographer, I'm my editor, I'm my writer, and so on and so forth. So again, the reason why I left New York was so I can start someplace small and just sort of hone my skills, do that for a few years, kind of go through boot camp, so to speak, but getting paid for it and working, and then eventually getting to that next level.
And you had gone down to, it was West Virginia, and that's where you had become a news anchor. And, what did a typical day look like then? Especially being on the news desk, and what were some of the challenges? And I mean, you mentioned this one part here, which is extremely interesting, about being the multimedia journalist, which I've had conversations with students about. That you need to be that kind of like complete package to be able to do all those things. Edit your own pieces, film it, drive out there, the whole thing. That's a major part. I remember New York One especially made that evident. So what was it like, when you went to West Virginia and you were doing the news anchoring?
West Virginia was a challenge. I was moving to a place I'd never been to before. I'm sure most of the people that are in this chat are like, well, I would never move there. You couldn't pay me enough. it doesn't, they can put me on the state flag, I'm not going there. Right. But I wanted a job and I wanted to get the ball rolling. It took me quite a few months after graduating from college to get somewhere, because a lot of news directors, after a while, yeah, it's great when you have a demo reel that you put together in college where you're, doing college stories or whatnot, or you worked at Channel 7, or you've got that CBS 2 experience. Some news directors, yeah, they're really impressed by that because they see, oh man, you went to the New York market. And then others are like, yeah, great, awesome. We've got 15 other people that worked in Chicago, Miami, wherever. Okay, cool. But what else do you have? What else can you bring to the table? Can you tell me a story? Can you do the job? Are you going to complain all the time? Or what can you do? So my first 6 months there was a challenge. I had to learn a lot in a very small amount of time in a place I'd never been to before. So I mean, I didn't start as a news anchor. I was a weekend anchor, and I was a day, like a 3-day a week reporter, working night side, but I was an MMJ. So again, I had to go out there and shoot, write, and edit all of my own stuff out in the field. But here's the problem, is I couldn't edit a lot of the stuff that I had out in the field because we didn't have those capabilities at the time. And I also worked for a very small station that did not have a very big budget. So I would have to collect information and come back to the station and edit. And a place like Southern West Virginia, your stories could be an hour and a half away. They could be 2 hours away. They could be wherever. So you're constantly on a deadline as well. And iPhones were still kind of getting better at the time. There wasn't a lot of service in the area. There was no such thing as 4G or 5G. You're looking for maps in order to get around, and a lot of the time it was, you were cooking through your minutes or whatever it was, your data on your phone to try to find out where it was that you were going, and you were not going to be reimbursed for that time on your phone to get to where it is that you were going. I had a boss who was very tough on me, and there was a moment where he told me, I was only about a couple of months in, where he said, I don't know if you're cut out for this. I don't know if you're going to be able to make it. Like when I hired you, I thought that you were the real deal, and I just don't know if you are. And that hurt to hear that. It was, it definitely was not very comforting. And, working on the weekends as a weekend anchor, I was the anchor, the editor, the producer, and I had to manage the website and our social media pages. So I was one guy doing 3 newscasts on a Saturday and a Sunday evening. And I also was responsible for a reporter that would be out in the field doing whatever story it was that they were doing. I was in what felt like a really high pressure situation. And I would have my boss calling me from the beach saying, hey, the website hasn't been updated in an hour. The Facebook page hasn't been updated in the last 20 minutes. Did you see this story out of Arizona? There's a huge fire burning out there. Do you have that in the show? Make sure that's a cold open off the top. Make sure that you edit this stuff in or that stuff in. And I was counting on, we were a CBS station at the time, so I was counting on what we called NewsPath, which is where you could get like stories and information from all of these other stations. And you would get a custom package from the reporters that were working that weekend. But they would take forever to sometimes get their stuff in. And I'm panicking, like, I got all this work to do and I still don't have my lead story in tonight. Like, I got to get this in, I got to get this in, I got to get this in. So it was really stressful there for a while. Eventually, 6 months later, I ended up getting promoted and I became the main anchor of the station. And that made life a lot easier. And it was a lot of fun because I can not really stress as much as I was before. It was a lot of reading and a lot of work to do and all of that. But it was good being able to get involved in the community and being a part of the people that were there and learning so much more about what was going on. So this place that I was, like, why am I moving here? Say like a year earlier, I learned to kind of fall in love with a little bit, like to get to enjoy and get to be a part of and realize that you are playing an important part in people's lives because you're providing them information and talking about their communities, right? So it was, the beginning was definitely tough, but it got better.
you know, in a sense, forged by fire, as they say, right? Or get thrown into the fire and then see what happens, you know. But again, you persevered, which is really great. And again, this is, you know, again, those are the challenges. Everything Dan just said, and it's like these are the things that you all have to know about: the deadlines, the personality types of management, and just, you know, keep forging ahead. So, what led you then to San Francisco?
So after working in Beckley, I was promoted to Charleston, West Virginia, to take over their statewide newscast, where I was sort of I was an anchor, but I was also in control of like the content that we could put on the air, which was primarily focused on politics, you know, government issues. The good thing about working in a small state like West Virginia was that you had your congressional delegation at arm's length. So we could talk to our US senators and our congresspeople all the time because they were always in the area and we were only 5 hours from DC. And one of the people that I got to talk to a lot and actually developed like somewhat of a pretty good relationship with is somebody who's in the news a lot lately when it comes to politics, and it's US Senator Joe Manchin. So he's somebody that I would run into all the time, and I would get on the show and we would talk with him. The governor of our state has made, or the governor of West Virginia rather, had made a lot of headlines at the time for being a really outspoken, strange individual. He was also the wealthiest guy in the state, big Donald Trump guy, and all of that. So, you know, definitely not going to win a lot of favors in New York, that's for sure. But I did that for a while there, and you know, it was a great experience. I still had to do a lot of multimedia stuff, and we were trying to put together a statewide newscast with a really slim staff. Our newsroom was constantly, you know, short staff, which is something I've experienced most of my career. Is most of the newsrooms I've worked in are short staff, and that's just sort of the nature of the business right now. I mean, there are some places that you could go to where they are fully staffed, but even if they are fully staffed, they'll probably tell you they're short staffed anyway, because a lot of places feel like there's never enough people to fully give you the gravity or the full story of what it is that you're trying to comb away at. But with the world moving as fast as it's moving, you know, where everything is right here on your phone or, you know, your tablet or whatever, it's like, you know, what was 5 minutes ago is no longer important now. Like we're now 5 steps ahead of what was there. Anyway, so I came out to San Francisco. I was with a girlfriend at the time, and she had gotten a job at a radio station. And I said, you know what? I always wanted to live in California. My contract's up in West Virginia. Let's go move out west. Let's go do that. And I thought it was going to be kind of easy for a minute there. I was thinking I was definitely going to get a job somewhere. And 4 months of unemployment humbled me pretty quickly, or maybe a little, maybe not quickly, but it definitely humbled me, where I couldn't get a job anywhere. And I mean, I was applying for jobs in Cincinnati and Southern California and Arizona, anywhere. And I would get interviews, but they would just go in a different direction. And it was kind of challenging. So I eventually got a phone call from the news director out here, Cron 4, where I work now, where I was going to, you know, come in and interview for an MMJ job. I had just about 72 hours earlier interviewed at another local station here to be a writer. So I would have been working behind the scenes when my ultimate goal was to get back on the air. I will say during that time, it was really tough because I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to be able to continue to do this anymore. And it was sort of scary, you know, to have worked so long to try to get into someplace and to you know, stay with this career, the sacrifices that I'd made over the previous decade. But thank God I was lucky that I ended up getting hired at Cron 4. And about a year in, they finally said, okay, we're going to let you go on the desk. We'll let you do some anchoring. So I fill in. I don't have a full-time job as an anchor. The higher you climb, the more competitive it gets. A place like San Francisco, for people that don't know what DMAs are, it's a designated market area that shows you the size of the market that you work in. New York is number 1. So That's why before we were talking about how challenging it is to get in there, it's because that's where everybody wants to be. Everybody wants to be in New York. Everybody wants to be in LA, Chicago, Boston, Philly, San Francisco, places like that. And so not everybody wants to go to Missoula, Montana to start their career, or Beckley, West Virginia to start their career. But you got to start somewhere. You don't have to be there forever. So that's essentially how I got out here in San Francisco, was that I'd just stayed consistent, just interviewed and emailed and emailed and emailed and sent out resumes. And, just like in the beginning of my career, when I graduated from college, it took me about 4 or 5 months to find a job. And then when I moved out here after finishing my last contract in West Virginia, it took about 4 or 5 months to get a job. It's always good to have a job lined up before you leave one. But, my personal life had sort of taken over at the time. So I was trying to balance it all. And thankfully, I was able to.
I mean, this is good to know, because again, I think sometimes students worry that it's like, how long is it going to take me? And you just have to kind of persevere. So it's like, it's going to take a couple of months. It could take up to a year even for some people. But the other thing I'll mention too is, sometimes students will come and see me and they're like, well, I've used a resume and I've applied a bunch of places, a lot of places, and I haven't heard back. And I said, well, how many is a lot of places? And they said like 15. I was like, that's not a lot of places. If you said it was 60, 70, 80, all right, maybe. And then maybe we'd have to look at your resume and see. But those are just the realities of it. But again, it's consistent, like what you're saying, Dan. You have to just be consistent and just keep at it and be diligent about it. Had you ever been to San Francisco before? Do you had to like acclimate yourself to the city?
Yeah, I had to learn a whole bunch. I'd never even been to California before. So I was moving here and I'd never even been here before. And San Francisco is different because it's not just San Francisco, it's the San Francisco Bay Area. So you're looking at about 8 million people spread out among 3 different cities. So you have San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose. And then you have all the communities that are in between those. So 9 different counties, and everything's all over the place. There's so much diversity here, so many different things. I mean, you're in the South Bay, where all the tech campuses are, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Twitters, you name it, is down in that area. Then you have San Francisco, which is like the financial hub, and also some tech companies that are there as well. You go to Oakland, where there are some major corporations that are based there, but very different sort of types of people that live in Oakland. There was because it's not far from Berkeley, which is the birthplace of the counterculture movement and the Summer of Love and 1969 and all of that. Then you go to what is called the North Bay, which is wine country, Napa, Sonoma, all of that. So you have people that are into farming or classy wines, and so there's so many different things that I had to learn about. And when I moved out here, sure, I was unemployed for 4 months, but I didn't stop paying attention to what was going on. I was following what everybody was reporting on and what the big stories were and what I could learn about the area. So I would just get out and talk to people and learn about what was important, what there is to see, what you can get involved in, and just trying to stay inquisitive, right? Like that's one of the most important things I think with this business, is just paying attention to what's going on. Like after a while, you will learn that you don't really ever check out, like even if you're off, you're still kind of reading the paper, pulling out your phone, looking at what's going on, or having a channel on in the background, whether that's CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever it is that you want to choose, or maybe just a local channel. We at Cron have a 24-hour streaming service. So oftentimes I just throw that on, and just to see like what we're talking about throughout the day, and if we're inviting anybody on and doing special interviews with them or whatnot. So yeah, moving out here, I hadn't known a lot, but I learned a lot pretty quickly. And this business will make you do that, especially when you start working, because if you don't, then you're not gonna make it, unfortunately. So, stay with it,
Well, it sounds adventurous, one, and then two, it's just adaptability. That's a huge part.
Yeah, you have to get used to being uncomfortable, really. I mean, frankly, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because things are always changing. And that's a good thing, right? So, because you're hoping at least that it's progressing things. And, I've had to learn that a lot, really just when you were talking before about, or when we were talking before about persistence and just being aggressive, you're going to have to do that in this business as well. Like when you're trying to get information or trying to get a story or whatnot, you got to keep dialing. You got to keep dialing, sending emails, and trying to get that story that everybody else has, or just trying to get that information or that video that somebody else has that you need to get, right? Because in some cases, when somebody goes on the air or some reporter has got that information, your boss or somebody's going to be calling you going, hey, so-and-so's got this, you better get that. We need that. Where's that information coming from? You got to get that information. So you got to be quick, you got to be ready to work and get it done fast. And while you're doing all of that, you got to be accurate, so you have to stay on top of what it is that you're doing. Yes, it is adventurous. Yes, it's a lot of fun, but yes, it's also stressful. And yes, there is a lot of times where you want to pull your hair out of your head, but that can be like any job, right? I mean, it's just sort of the experience. That's life in general. But again, I couldn't see myself doing anything else. And I hope that people that are pursuing this career understand that it's a very rewarding career. It could be a lot of fun, and it's an experience like not a lot of other people get. You get to be in the front row of what's happening, and telling other people about it as well. So.
And you touched upon this a little bit, but do you have any specific advice for students in terms of how to pull that story together, or how to pitch a story, or obviously it's being able to work fast and be adaptable. Are there any other things, any other tips? I mean, again, having that news channel on all the time and just having the news on is a huge tip. But is there anything else, in terms of like pulling together stories?
Yeah, I would say just really, just it's as simple as sometimes just looking at your local newspaper, and I know that, there's a lot of times where you'll meet news directors or professors or whoever that are saying, hey, you should be generating sources at the ground level. And, maybe you go to the local diner and you talk to people about whatever it is and this, that, and the other thing. And I mean, I didn't really have that experience. I mean, there are people that you will meet in the community. So when you go out to events or you go to different stories, when you make connections on that scene, you'll often get led to other stories or getting into contact with people that might help you on a story down the road. So when you're out working on something, always try to see if you could find something else that might be going on there, or just talking to somebody else that's there. Exchange information with that person. They might be able to help you out. Who knows? A car accident that has some sort of significance to it happens in a particular council member's district, and you made connections with them while working at a ribbon cutting or something like that. Or, you have a good relationship with somebody that you developed because you were involved with some sort of charity event, and all of these well-known people in town were also there. Exchange information with them so that you have them when you need them. When you're first starting out and you work in a smaller market, it's really important to make those connections, because in small towns, everybody knows everybody, and you got to know the right people too, so that you can get the good story, right? And it's competitive at that, even at the smaller level, at the smaller stations, because things are a lot more intimate at that level. Sort of with the process that I go through right now, there's so many more cooks in the kitchen when you're in a bigger station, a bigger market. A lot of the times you get into the afternoon meeting, there is a story that we're going to have to cover that day, whether that's Ukraine or shootings that have been happening, or a stabbing that happened last night, or something that's big that we know that everybody's going to need to follow up on, tonight. And that's mostly because all the other stations are going to be working on it as well, right? A storm system's moving through. That means everybody's going to be covering weather that night. That's a big thing. The governor's coming to town. That's a big deal. Whether politics is going to be working on that or whatever it is, you may end up having to cover it that night. So a lot of the times I try to take a look at what's going on and what people are talking about. Hell, it could be as simple as using Nextdoor. I don't know how familiar people are with that app. It's an app where you're a part of a community, and people all talk about what's going on in that community. And you may find that there's something happening there where they're saying, hey, look, they were supposed to install these speed bumps, on so-and-so street, and they haven't done it yet. And I'm constantly watching my kids riding their bikes, and cars are going 75 miles per hour down this road. I mean, that's a little extreme, but they're speeding down the road. Maybe there's a story there. We call a council member, hey, these speed bumps were supposed to be installed 7 months ago. It cost the city $10 million apparently to get this done. Hasn't been done yet. And people in this neighborhood have kids riding around. What's going on here? Boom, you got yourself a story, and nobody else is on it yet. And then the next day, you'll see all of a sudden the local newspaper's doing something on it, which is great. You want that because then you're influencing the coverage of the market. And hey, a little pat on the back for yourself, but also you're doing a story that people care about in your community, hell, next door to you. So those are some of the cool things that you could get into, or also just trying to think outside of the box. Say you go on a local crime blotter and they're talking about last night, there was an attempted robbery at a jewelry store at a mall, but the guy was able to stop the robbery because he pulled out a gun, or he defended the business, or he did something. Okay, that's pretty compelling, right? A lot of the times you hear somebody breaks in somewhere, they steal something, and they get out. But this guy, whoa, he fought back. So he had something that was able to stop these guys from doing this. Okay, good story. But even better is if you find out that the jewelry store has surveillance cameras. So now you have this happening on camera, and visuals are everything in television. You always need video for stories. And a lot of times it becomes challenging when you're an MMJ and they tell you, hey, it's really windy outside and you got to do the story about the wind, and you're shooting at a tree and the tree's just doing that. Sometimes it's very funny. It's like, what am I doing out here? So you're hoping to get somebody walking down the street doing this or whatever it is, right? Like, but you got to get that video. And sometimes your camera, is getting blown around, on a tripod or whatnot. So, and you got to make sure that you don't break that, because if you do, somebody's in trouble. So anyway, there's a really long answer to your question. I'm sort of digressing and going in multiple directions, but you try to pay attention to what's going on, and sometimes you could find that little thing that'll make it interesting. The number one thing for me when it comes to pitching a story is, what are the visuals to that story? What can I tell you through a camera? What can I tell you through video? What's going to make this compelling? Why am I going to care, right? And sometimes there's cause and effect stories that need to be covered and they don't have the greatest visuals to them. But if you could get that good soundbite, or you could get that person that's talking about something that can make the story compelling, also with the type of, the way that you write the story, then that would be good as well. Did you also ask me how I put things together? Or I can't remember.
Yeah, like putting the pitch together if you're pitching something.
Yeah, so I mean, and then essentially, let's say you want to have like 3 good story ideas a day, and then you go into your afternoon meeting or your morning meeting or whatever it is, and then you talk about what it is that you're going to cover. Sometimes they say, hey, look, we don't like any of those stories at all. You're going to do this, and there you go. But at least you show up with something. Like, it's important for you to pay attention. That's why it's important for you to pay attention to what's going on, because if you're pitching things that somebody did yesterday, or a story that really doesn't have anything left to it, there's really nothing to squeeze out of it anymore, then you're sort of wasting your time, and your newsroom may look at it as, well, this person isn't really engaged with what's happening here. Like, what else can you get me? What else can you tell me about something? What can you get that's a little different? What's a different angle to maybe approach a story that everybody covered yesterday? Hey, maybe they didn't take a look at what, how much of a problem this has been. A multi-car accident, several fatalities, right, at an intersection. And then you find out, hey, this intersection has had multiple accidents over the last 10 years. And these problems were going to get solved by them doing something different with the light system, but maybe they never updated that light system. New angle, same story that we had yesterday, but now it's a different story because you have this new angle. So you try to approach your job by looking at those things. And then you go out and do it, and you got to be ready to work quickly, because the deadlines are fast, and stations are adding more newscasts. Companies don't want to pay for programming anymore. The Dr. Phil's and the Ellen shows and the Oprah shows and all of that, they're going by the wayside. Sure, people are still engaged with them. There is still a lot of success with them, but companies again are just starting to say, I don't really need to pay for this anymore. I mean, we can have the programming and we can put it on our streaming service, but we still have a broadcast channel. So what are we going to do at 4 o'clock? We're going to add more news. Okay, cool. So your deadline that used to be at 6 p.m. is now at 4 p.m. And you also have a 5 p.m. show. And if it's a story that's big enough for them, you're now doing a story at 4, 5, and 6. And say your shift started at 2. You got to be ready to work pretty quickly.
Well, it's a lot. It's good insight though. It's good insight for students to be aware of. I mean, again, this is it's cliche, fast paced, high demand environment. It's not so cliche though. I mean, this is what that is, and this is the nature of journalism, So, Marwa has a question actually. Marwa, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, actually, since you mentioned that when you first started like your job search, you've been emailing back and forth, and like you sent out like hundreds of emails, but like we see now that, for example, job search and internship has like changed a lot with the tools that we have today. So in regard to that, I wanted to ask how important are platforms like LinkedIn, social media for a reporter, like Twitter, or any other social media platform for a job search, or to, I don't know, develop skills, let's say.
Sure. Okay, so in terms of the job search, yeah, I mean, LinkedIn could be really valuable. I mean, LinkedIn has evolved a lot over the last 10 years, because at first it was definitely a place where you can connect and you can find people that you wouldn't normally find just anywhere. And sometimes it would work if you message them, sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes it helps if you have an email, and sometimes it's just got to be the job that they have open at the time, right? So I would say that it's really important and that you would use that, but also try to get in direct contact with them through emails. Phone calls are really challenging when it comes to looking for jobs, because everybody is always so busy, and even if they're not busy, they don't want to spend time talking to you. Unfortunately, that's just the way some places can be, and that's why it really helps to get an internship, because then if you meet the person face to face, or you make the connection face to face, or you meet somebody, they may know somebody that worked at another station that you're looking at working at, because not everybody starts in New York. For example, when I was first starting out, one of my goals was to get a job in Myrtle Beach, right? Oh yeah, let's go to Myrtle Beach. It's a nice, easy market. I'm at the beach. This is a great place to work. But everybody wants to work in Myrtle Beach when they're starting out, because nobody wants to work in Beckley, West Virginia. Nobody wants to work in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky or Oklahoma or whatever, right? So it helped that I knew somebody that knew somebody, because they started at that station at some point. It didn't work out for me, but it can work out if the position is open, and it's better than not hearing anything at all. In terms of using other social media outlets, when it comes to the job search, I'm not so sure on that. Twitter and Facebook and things like that might be a little too informal. If somebody reaches out to you and they happen to be legit, cool, that's great. I mean, you would want to, you would want to engage with that person and then continue on from there. But I think that those situations are few and far between. So again, email is always good. Use LinkedIn if you can. For the other social media sites, I'm not 100% sure on how well that will work out for you. However, if you do find them on social media and they happen to put their email or some way to get in contact with them, take advantage of that. Absolutely. But then when it comes to the job, social media is super important. It's almost everything now. Streaming, where you could get information, where you could get stories. People are always talking on Twitter, on Facebook. Great way to get in touch with sources, to get information, joining community groups, seeing what people are talking about there. Literally, social media is everything now. Everything is streaming. The old days of appointment television are pretty much over, right? So you just got to be available when they're available. So hopefully I was able to answer your question there. I'm sorry, sometimes I sort of veer off, but yeah. Stay persistent. You'll get there. It'll work.
Okay, so in relation to that, I also wanted to ask what kind of organization students should join like clubs, etc., and how important it is for them to add it on their resume?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know what's still available at Brooklyn College. For people that are studying broadcast journalism that are in this group or studying communications or whatnot, I don't know if, is the Broadcast News Institute still a thing there at Brooklyn?
It's different. The television radio department and journalism, they sort of it's kind of merged in the last couple of years. Journalism used to be over in English, and they sort of pulled it into TV radio, and then they renamed TV radio TREM, television, radio, and emerging media, to take advantage of like the streaming services and social media. So they added that component, and then there's also something called JAMS, which is journalism and media studies, and that sort of has been merged from what was English into broadcast journalism. So that's happened over the last few years. But in terms of like things that they should do, I mean, the BC Vanguard is the college newspaper. Now back 10 years ago, there were two newspapers. I'm not sure if you remember. There was the Excelsior and there was the Kingsman. They merged it into the Vanguard now. So, I mean, that's an option for sure. The television studio had to be redone, but I think it's back up and running. And then there's also the Brooklyn College radio station, which I think there was issues with it during the pandemic, but I think it's on its comeback now. So, those are some of the on-campus resources that I always tell students to take advantage of. But even just memberships, just members of, like anything that's on LinkedIn in terms of memberships for journalists, New York journalists, or just journalists in general. I mean, what do you think in terms of that?
I would say that, if there is any sort of societies, there's societies for African-American journalists, Hispanic journalists, anything that you could find where you can connect with people that have shared experiences, right? So I would recommend joining any of those organizations if you can. And of the things that Michael had mentioned at the school, if you could squeeze it into your schedule and balance it out with your classwork, why not? You might find something that'll pique your interest, right? Radio could be a lot of fun. There's people that are still doing that. It's still a business. It still exists. Newspapers still exist. It's digital media now. And there's something that you can introduce to, say, the newspaper, that you're maybe doing digital stuff like digital vlogs or whatnot, and doing video, introducing more video into what they're doing, and photography, and so what it is that they're doing. So, if I could recommend, those are like organizations, groups that you could look into. Anything that can sort of broaden your understanding in broadcast journalism is something that I would advocate for. But if you want to get involved in like local news, it's as easy as just staying engaged with what's happening in your community, and also just getting that experience in a newsroom. There's nothing like being in a newsroom and seeing what it's like, being there, seeing how people are working, what they're doing. And even if it seems like you're not doing anything, you're still consuming what's happening around you. You will start to understand, and you will start to see some sort of flow. And it might not make sense at first, but eventually you'll start to see, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Oh, I see why this person is doing what they're doing, or how they're thinking about what they're doing and whatnot. So that's my number one recommendation is getting into a newsroom no matter what. And, and building that tape. If you want to be on air, getting that tape, put that tape together, make mistakes. You're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be amazing. You maybe have to get rid of that New York accent. You'll work on it. It'll come. What
are you talking about? What are you talking about? Forget about it.
That's definitely a thing. Trust me. I learned pretty quickly when you're in a place like Southern West Virginia that you sound like a city slicker. So
it's good to know. That is absolutely good to know. Marwa has another question. I think we have two more questions, and then if anybody has questions, put it in the chat. But Marwa, what's your next one?
All right, speaking of news coverage, we wanted to ask you about how are things looking like at Contour at the moment with like the reporting on current issues such as U.S. involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war, or current local issues in California or around the state in general. or any topics you guys cover, such as sports?
So the great thing about California is it's kind of like New York, when if it happens here, it happened everywhere. It is a big deal here. It's a big deal everywhere. Gas prices, big deal here, big deal everywhere. War in Ukraine, big deal here, big deal everywhere. Reason being is because of the size of our populations and because of the importance that we play in not only America, but also globally. New York is as far as I'm concerned, the center of the universe, right? The New York Stock Exchange, you have all these major businesses that are there. You got major sports teams that are there. It's the largest city in the United States. You got 5 boroughs made up of, millions and millions and millions of people. I mean, it's completely different than how things are here, because things are a lot more spread out. They're not as congested, right? And we saw that during the pandemic with people, how the virus just ran through the city because everybody takes public transportation and everybody lives in apartment buildings and everybody's on top of each other and so on and so forth. So right now with coverage, it's sort of been hybrid, right? We're doing a lot of news like this, where we are exposing ourselves to Zoom and doing a lot of things, over the internet, because the virus still exists, right? There are variants of the virus that exist. So it's forced us to sort of work differently. And in some cases, it also taught us that maybe we don't have to be doing things the way that we did them before, that we don't have to use so many different resources to get something accomplished. We could still get the same messaging across. We could still somewhat get the same sort of quality of what it is that we're trying to do across, without having to force people to go out of their way to do something that just maybe isn't necessary. Maybe was looked at more of a luxury now than it was 2 years ago. The business has changed a lot just in the past couple of years dealing with the pandemic, because of things like Zoom and streaming services and working from home, and dealing with wearing masks and then talking with people about very challenging things, right? We're watching businesses crumble. We're watching people die. We don't know what we're going to do. We're witnessing history unfolding every day throughout this pandemic. Thank goodness for sort of reaching the end of this, right? So that we're normalizing things again. But for example, when I lived in New York in 7th grade, 9/11 happened, right? And for people that were going through that time, it was marked as there was before 9/11 and after 9/11. And then 2020 was like now the new, okay, before 2020, what comes after 2020? It's that point in history where, where are we going to go next? What are we going to do now? As to what we're doing, we're still doing the news. I mean, we've added newscasts surprisingly during the pandemic. The staffing really hasn't gotten that much better, but we're working on it. We're getting there. Businesses and companies are not spending as much as they used to. So we're trying to have to get really resourceful with what it is that we're doing. And we're doing a pretty good job at it. I think remarkably, we're doing a pretty good job at what we're doing, given the circumstances. And the business is changing so much again. And, some people are learning that maybe they don't want to stick around as long anymore, and maybe they want to do something else. And, there isn't quite a shine to it as much as there used to be. But that's just sort of the business side of it. But in terms of what we've been covering with the war in Ukraine, the great thing about living in a place like the Bay Area is that you'll find somebody who has some sort of connection there. So you try to find those people that are going there and helping out, or family members that are there or whatnot. You'll find that in New York, of course, too. There's probably tons of people that are immigrants from that part of the country that could give you a breadth of knowledge into what's going on and how they feel about the situation. And inflation has become a big deal. Gas has become a big deal. I mean, we in California pay more than anybody for gas to begin with, and now we're paying like $6 a gallon for gas. So that really stinks. So it's gotten kind of brutal to have to deal with things that way. But everybody's kind of going through it at the same time. It's not like we're all looking at each other saying, "Hey, look, it's your fault." No, it's my fault. And it's and electric vehicles are becoming a bigger thing, right? With Tesla and all of that. So there's a lot of different things going on. Sports has been fun because we have successful teams. The Giants were really good last year. the Warriors were looking really good, and then Steph Curry gets hurt, and now they beat the Heat last night, but they couldn't beat the Magic the other night. But the fans are pretty loyal when they're good, just like New Yorkers, right? They'll let you know when you're bad. Hockey is pretty fun out here. It's great to have so many different teams that are here, right? It's kind of like the Mets and the Yankees. You have the A's and the Athletics. We used to have the Raiders, don't have the Raiders anymore. They're in Vegas, but we have the 49ers, and the 49ers have been pretty successful. So it's been fun covering them as well. It's great working in the big cities, like there's always something going on. It feels like some days news is just falling out of the trees. So hopefully I'll see you guys out there at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of really great variety in terms of, being able to cover, all these different topics, and you can kind of pivot from one thing to another. I know, like I said, I mean, there are some students here that have that interest in sports. And there is a question about it. We're going to touch upon that in a second. I mean, me personally, of course, I mean, your original email was Yankee what? It was like Yankee and all.
Man 3189 or something like that.
So, I mean, but again, you're a fan of sports, right? Just overall. Yeah. So that's why you're able to make that pivot. That's why you can cover like the 49ers and things like that, and just anything out in LA. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say that there's one other thing that has to be considered here too, is that there's a lot of fun things to cover here, but it's also, California is also like the most disaster prone state in the country. So there's a lot of different things that we have to cover here in terms of earthquakes, wildfires. We don't get a lot of rain here. We don't get snow unless you're in the mountains. So it's kind of like the same every day almost. So it's pretty beautiful. We're pretty spoiled in terms of the weather here. So
there's fog, though.
We do have fog, yeah.
Carl,
but see,
is that what it's called, Carl?
Yeah. So here's what's interesting about that, though. I won't take long on this. We have what's called microclimates here in the Bay Area. So I live in the East Bay. So I live about 25 miles east of San Francisco. And say today it'll be 75 degrees. I'll go to Oakland, it'll be 70 degrees. I'll go to San Francisco, it'll be 60 degrees, 55 degrees with fog. So it's different temperatures depending on where you go. You go to wine country, it could be 90 degrees, it could be 100 degrees. You can go to the South Bay, San Jose, it could be 80 degrees. Where I am, it could be 90 degrees. It could be 65 in San Francisco.
It's wild. It is absolutely wild, because I'm always interested in looking into travel, and I've looked a lot into San Francisco, and I've heard that about that. So I've seen a lot of YouTubers that are like, definitely bring your jacket.
Yeah, you never know how to prepare. Yeah, always have a jacket. You always have to have a jacket and a pair of jeans, because there's no such thing as like summer nights here. It cools off. Right. It always cools off. So there's no like humidity that traps everything in. Like there is humidity some days, but not that much. We're spoiled.
I heard that. Yeah, I don't know why so I don't know. Have you heard this, that they call the fog out there Carl, and it's got an Instagram or something like that, which is pretty funny.
Carl, and then it was at one point gender neutral, where it was like Carla, and I don't know what name they've settled on, but it is back in full force, because it was gone for a little bit during the pandemic there, but now we're back to seeing. The funny thing about it is, if we have a clear, beautiful day in San Francisco, that's when the Instagram or the Facebook or the Twitter will say, oh my God, it's absolutely disgusting in San Francisco. But when the fog comes, it's like, oh my God, it's a great day in San Francisco. And I'm like, no, I want the clear day. I don't want to freeze.
I love that. And again, like each city has its own identity too, right? So, I mean, that's just interesting to kind of hear that. So it's, different than New York.
Yeah.
So we're going to start asking some questions in the chat. There's one question about, have you ever had like a boss make you drop a story, or maybe the story wasn't put out there because it's controversial or some other factor?
There are situations where that happens, and that is only because you don't have enough information, or sometimes it's just a little too sensational, right? Like, is it really worth covering that story? Is it really worth showing that video, right? Like, do we have to? Like, what do we get out of this, right? Are we doing it to simply shock people, or are we doing it to, inform people what's the goal here. So there have been situations where that happens. I know that there was, so when you get into like some of the bigger markets, there are people that can get you information and video that are known as stringers. And there are, situations where you're thinking, oh, wow, like this sounds like a really good, compelling story, but we don't have a lot of backstory on it. So we don't know how legit all of this information is. So yes, there are moments where I've been turned off. I know that one time I thought this would have been a really interesting story to cover, and it was there was an art gallery in San Francisco that had to move locations because the art that was inside was all about Donald Trump. It was not looking at him in a very positive light. And I just thought it would be interesting visually to see what's going on inside there and what made this so controversial. And the fact that they also had to move the gallery somewhere else because they were afraid of either counter protesters or whoever it was. My boss was like, well, we don't need to go down that road. I don't know why. Why do you want to cover that and this, that, and the other thing? And I'm like, well, because I think it's interesting. That's all. However, I have gotten lucky enough to cover some stories here where, this is a very liberal area. The Bay Area in general is very liberal. All of our congressional members are Democrats. All of our mayors are typically Democrats. Our city council members are typically Democrats. So there's a lot of open-mindedness, a lot of liberal influence in this area. So somebody like Donald Trump or conservatives for that matter are not often looked at in a very positive light. So I did luckily get to do one story one time where we actually met people who lived in the Bay Area that were conservatives, that were Donald Trump supporters, and what it was like for them to experience life living here and maybe why they would want to live here. And if they've had any sort of issues when it comes to them walking down the street wearing a MAGA hat or whatever it is. So that was at least cool. But you will experience, hopefully you will not experience a news director telling you not to cover something to cover somebody's butt, or because, it's against what they personally believe. Hopefully it's because there's not really anything to truly get out of covering that story, any sort of information that somebody's actually going to gain out of that other than seeing a car running over a dog or seeing somebody getting shot at a gas station or them getting shoved on a street corner and finding out that that's the last time that we saw that person alive, right? So I just hope that you don't have that sort of experience where they at least make an editorial decision that is an informed editorial decision.
Very good point. Very, very good point.
Right. I'm going to move on to the next question.
Yeah, Mara, go ahead.
He said, as a new anchor, do you collaborate with sports reporters? If so, do you know what their work day is like on a daily basis?
Are you talking about like what sports people do, like what they do on a typical day? I think they usually try to stay informed with what's happening, right? So when you work in smaller towns, high school sports. So where are we in terms of the season, right? Baseball season's gearing up. What are the big stories? What are the big schools that you have to cover? Are you going to go to practice? Are you going to talk to coaches? What are you going to do? And sports departments have been shrinking at local television stations because unfortunately, people are not tuning into the 6 o'clock news to get the highlights for the Magic game that happened last night or the Yankee game that happened. That's why they have Sports Center. That's why they have their phones, right? That's why they have ESPN and Fox Sports and NBC and all of that they could tune into. So at the local level, you're going to be dealing a lot with probably high school or college. So you'll be, again, probably going out and shooting practices, talking to coaches, talking to whoever the big time players are, and then putting together your sportscast later that night. At smaller stations, you're going to be working a lot on your own. There's maybe just you and one other person that's going to be covering sports that night. A lot of places, especially in the South, high school football is a really big deal. So they'll do like a Friday night high school football wrap-up show or whatnot. And a lot of people usually jump on board and go out and go shoot a lot of those games. I know that when I was anchoring, we would have to do a 5, a 6, a 10, and an 11 o'clock newscast. I wouldn't do the 10 o'clock newscast because I would jump out and go shoot a couple of games after the 6, come back, edit those highlights, and then host the sports show, Friday night sports show, with the sports director, who was only one person at the time, unfortunately, at our station, because we just didn't have the budget for it. So you'll be focusing a lot on those things. At a level like this, it's whatever the big major thing is happening, right? What's happening with the Oakland A's, what's happening with the 49ers, what's happening with the Golden State Warriors, the Giants, the Sharks. We have college, right? So Stanford basketball, women's basketball is a big deal here right now. We have the NCAA March Madness in San Francisco. Coach K is here. So this is his farewell tour for Duke. So that's, of course, a storyline for everybody, right? And you'll also cover some of the big national things that are going on, of course, just to fill your sports cast. You'll have more hands on deck when you get to a level like this. But in the beginning, it's mostly just kind of getting comfortable, shooting highlights, telling some stories, getting your flow together, coming up with maybe some of those catchphrases that you see on Sports Center or whatnot. The beginning is really just all about getting comfortable, really. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right, and then I'm going to move on to Jenna's question. You sort of answered. It's about how do you manage your deadlines, but I'm also going to add to that, what are some of the key skills a student should have to meet their deadlines?
Time management, really. Knowing how much time you have to get somewhere and what you got to do to get working, right? Somebody like me, for example, before the pandemic, I was spending a lot of time going into San Francisco, finding out what my story was, doing the afternoon meeting, and then sometimes I would have to go to San Jose from San Francisco. It's about 50 miles away, but cars are king in California and cars are king in the San Francisco Bay Area. So there's a lot of commuters, which means your 50-mile ride to San Jose could be an hour and a half. There's a car accident, now it's 2 hours. Still got to get to the scene. So you got to work on what you got to get. You got to gather that information, get the players moving. And sometimes you're driving and dialing, and it's dangerous and it's not great, but you got to do it because you got to get that story. And don't waste time. Every little minute counts. So when you're trying to get something done, you're also thinking about the next thing that you got to get done, right? If you're going to be working in smaller markets, smaller stations, and even in some cases, the bigger places, like Michael mentioned, New York 1, even where I'm working here in San Francisco, you got to go out and shoot, write, and edit all your own stuff. So when you're out there shooting, be on top of it. Know what it is, the video that you need to get, know how it is that you need to tell the story, and getting all that stuff done, fast paced, getting it into your computer and then hacking that stuff up, just getting it put together, writing your story quickly. It's just learning how to be faster and knowing that there's constantly like a deadline. So like you have to know, like I said, time management, how much time it's going to take you to get there. What are the things that you can do during that time in your car as you're on your way to getting to that place? And once you get there, start knocking out all the things that you need to get knocked out. Once you get all that wrapped up, you jump in and you start getting everything done on your computer and understanding that, hey, I've got this much time to get something done. I just got to get it done. Know where you're going, know what's expected of you, what shows you're going to be in, what time you're going to be in that show, whether you need to be live, whether you're doing a look live, which is like a taped report, whether you need to go meet somebody somewhere and what time you have to meet that person, communicating with your producers constantly. And, in my first job, my boss told me that it doesn't have to be perfect. Your job is to make air. And that's what you have to do. It's just having that in the back of your mind that you have to make air. It's not the last story you're ever going to do. It might not be the only story that you do that day, but you got to make your slot. You got to make deadline. You got to get it done and be accurate. Right. So really it's just staying on top of it, you know, knowing what's going on, what's happening next, where are we gonna go, what are we gonna do, how do we get it done, and then getting it in. That's really, you know, what I would suggest people do. Time management's like the number one thing. And then when you're shooting video, focus on what it is that you're shooting. Use your tripod, white balance, focus. When it comes to editing, know what it is that you need to put together to tell the story. Close-ups, medium shots, wide shots, getting good sound. Sound is so important when it comes to telling a compelling story. Having good video, in focus video. But geez, you could do this stuff on your phone a lot of the time. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, with what these things could do now, they collect high quality sound, they collect high quality video. Still images matter as well. Getting good pictures on there as well. I mean, a lot of places have been moving in that direction where they have people going out and shooting on their phones. I mean, it's scary for me because I like using a camera and all of that, but it's scary for the guy whose only job it is to use a camera. So, because that means I'm taking his job as well. We're all getting our jobs taken. You know, just knowing that when you're out there shooting stuff, that you don't have to spend all day on it. You know, you get good 10, 15 seconds of really good video, move on to the next shot, move on to the next shot, move on to the next shot. Just be fast.
That's great advice. I mean, that's again, it's the hustle is real, right? So working at that fast pace. Now, you did mention, yes, I mean, with the phones and everything, and things are getting easier with the phones. But I still think, you know, again, especially with preparing students for a career in journalism and broadcast journalism, still being able to know how to use DSLRs, the tripods, all of that. But then also, what kind of video programming do you typically use? Is it Premiere, Final Cut, Avid?
We use Premiere, and Premiere has become pretty well used across most of the industry these days. I mean, there are the Avids and I don't even know if Edius is still a thing. Final Cut is not something you see very often because people aren't using Macs in newsrooms; they're using personal computers. If you work for a company like I work for, Nexstar Media Group, we have a license with Premiere, so everybody's using Premiere. So, and it's a good thing that you will get used to using. It's good to get acclimated to using those kinds of things, especially because there's a lot of cool things that you could do with them: slow-mo, flashes, color corrections in case you didn't do a great job shooting the video that you shot. So I would say that it's good to use those things. You know, learn how to use a camera, of course, understand audio and again, white balance, things like that, because you want to be able to do a great job in terms of the quality of your content. But again, you know, when it comes to phones, so much stuff these days has become user generated, right? When there's a mountain lion, which you don't really see in New York, but we see them all the time out here, shows up in somebody's backyard and it's on a Ring camera or whatnot. You know, that's cool because you're not there with your camera hanging out all night like, well, I know this mountain lion is going to show up in somebody's backyard today. Or, you know, there's you know, maybe an accident that happens that nobody saw, but somebody's camera outside of their home captured it. Then you're able to tell what happened during that moment. So learning how to edit those things to make them compelling as well is a good skill to have. You know, you'll develop it over time, really. I remember when I first was starting out, I was like scared of using a camera. I was scared of learning how to edit because I didn't like understand it, you know, like I just wanted to write the words and talk on camera. And now I love editing and I love being able to put things together because it's cool what you can do. So you learn on the job, you know.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah. How much experience did you have with all that tech, you know, in terms of the cameras and the video editing while you were in college, but then you kind of learned on the go, right? You learned.
Yeah. I would say that I learned a lot more just working, really, because it's high pressure. you have to learn. When you're in college, you got 2 weeks to work on a story. Now I've got a couple hours. So, and it's got to be, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and the video, and then be ready to go live. And I'm the cameraman a lot of the time. I do my own live shots at the scene. So you gotta have that information together and the video together, and making sure that it all works. Yeah, I mean, I had some experience in college. I would take advantage as much as you can while you're in school, because they're not paying you. So get that experience while you're there, if you can, if you're able to get out and do things, and and then be responsible with that equipment, because you don't want to break it. It doesn't belong to you, and understanding that it is important to take care of the things that you have, so that you can do your job. So
the other thing I mention to students too sometimes, if they, especially during the pandemic, it was hard because, again, a lot of these, and we talked about it before, the studio here or the radio station here or the newspaper here on campus wasn't available. So, and sometimes, now that they are, and they're coming back around again and opening up, which is amazing, people should take advantage of it. But I want to know what your take is on this, Dan. Like, I tell students sometimes they need to be an entrepreneur for themselves and go out there and cover their own stories, their own topics, and then build their own maybe YouTube channel, a real something. Sometimes I tell people, don't just wait for the internship and then you'll do that, or maybe go out there. And again, New York City, there are a million stories that you could have here in New York City. So do you suggest people should really go out there and kind of be entrepreneurs for themselves to build their reels?
I would say if they, if you want to, yeah, really. I mean, it depends on how bad you want it, right? And what your passions are and what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, I didn't go out and do a lot of my own blogging and all of that when I was starting out. But then again, things have changed so much over the last 10 years that, yeah, like you said, there are so many different stories that you can tell out there, right? I mean, I remember taking the bus to Brooklyn College's campus, and we would go through Avenue J, and I would always see this huge line of people outside of this pizza place that I didn't really know much about, but lo and behold, it ends up becoming this world famous place called the Forest Pizza that everybody wants to go to, and it's only open for a certain amount of hours or whatnot. And he passed away, right, I think like a week ago. And that was a story that was like big. I think all the local channels covered it and all of that. And I remember nobody even talking about that pizza place when I was, working at Channel 7 or Channel 2 10 years ago. So people are learning that what used to be looked at as just being hyper local is no longer hyper local anymore, because with social media, things become so important, right? You have this one place that's known for making an amazing pizza, for example, and people know about it in Brooklyn. But if I live in Manhattan or Queens or the Bronx or whatever, I'm like, when am I going to go to Brooklyn? I'm never going to go to Brooklyn, whatever. But when they see it on Instagram, that is the slice of pizza to get, my goodness, everybody's going to Brooklyn now, right? So social media has made things more attractive. I mean, if you cover something that everybody's talking about on social media, that story only grows and it only becomes a bigger deal for what it is that you're doing. So maybe you find something in your neighborhood that is unique or could be interesting that other places have made a really big deal about, but they haven't seen what you got yet, right? Like they haven't seen your story yet. So there is an opportunity for you to stumble upon something that could be quite incredible, right? I mean, I did a story one time about these guys that were going around in Oakland because they were sick and tired of the city government not filling their potholes and everybody driving around and blowing their tires out all over the place. So they went out and called themselves the pothole vigilantes and would go out late at night and fill the potholes on their own and do that, right? And it no longer is a story about these guys going around filling up potholes. It's about a failure of city government not doing what its citizens put them in place to do. And then you find out, oh my goodness, potholes are a major problem in cities all across America. Potholes are a problem in the Bronx. Potholes are a problem in Beckley, West Virginia. They're a problem in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hell, we did a survey in Austin, Texas, and found out that the #1 complaint that people had with city government was that there's potholes everywhere and nobody's solving this problem. So it's no longer just this one story in this one little neighborhood. It's a thing that everybody's going through everywhere. And sometimes people just take the matter into their own hands. And hell, maybe they've got a pothole vigilantes that start there or start wherever. So really just staying involved with what's happening. You never know what you could find out about, right? Like there could be a story there that and I did this story, nobody else was doing this story. The next day, every station was covering the story. So like you could be that person that does the thing that influences what everybody else wants to do, right? So, and you could be doing that and you don't even work for a TV station. All of a sudden, all the TV stations are covering it, right? And maybe you get something that they can't get at first, and you're that inside track to them. And before you know it, maybe you get a job out of it. Who knows?
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. We definitely need some, what was it, pothole vigilantes here in Brooklyn. With my Brooklyn accent, somebody got to go and do that. All right, let's get them here in New York for sure.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And in terms of what you had said before, hyper local and those little hidden gems that then all of a sudden all the other cities could kind of like follow. I tell students there are certain websites. Again, I took up photography over the last few years, and a site that was really amazing, Atlas Obscura. Do Atlas Obscura, New York City, and it gives you, I think it's about 700 different things about New York City that even us that have lived here in New York had no idea existed in all 5 boroughs. I always encourage students to look at that because you got potential stories there. So there's that. I love that one, Atlas Obscura. I did that for San Francisco. I did that for LA. When I went to LA, I found stuff that even people that were living in LA had no idea existed. So there's that. So Atlas Obscura, also Untapped Cities is another one that's fantastic. So I would definitely suggest that for students that are here. Those 2 websites are great. So we're almost coming up to the end of our Zoom here. I want to ask you, Dan, 2 questions. One would be, did you have a specific story that you feel over the years was like maybe your favorite, or have you already kind of touched upon that?
Yeah, I mean, Pothole Vigilantes was a really fun one to work on. Another fun one to work on was this kid who was also in Oakland that was doing like sidewalk chalk art. And he was like 3 or 4 years old, and he was drawing better than I could draw in my best days. Like it was just awesome. Like he's just doodling out Sonic the Hedgehog and Elmo from Sesame Street and all of that. So it was really fun to be able to tell those stories because they're usually cute and you get good sound bites out of them. Sports of course is always fun to cover because it kind of takes me back to my roots and just being out there with the fans because it brings everybody together, right? Like during times where you deal with so many people like fighting or arguing or racial issues or whatever, you find that sports brings people together. And that's always fun to be able to cover and to be involved with. Of course, finding those people that are doing really good things in the community that also have like sort of that visual aspect to them where you can show something, that makes the story even more interesting. That would be kind of like the stuff that I've enjoyed, stuff where you can see the action, be a part of the action, while also either seeing something good happen or good come out of whatever's happening, or covering sports or just those unique sort of stories. Those are the things that I like.
That's great. That's great. And our last question, because again, you're very busy and we're coming up on time, but any final advice? I know you've shared so much amazing advice, insight. Do you have any final thoughts or advice for students that are just looking to kind of gain more experience or are about to graduate and they have some experience, but they're looking to, land that job right after they graduate, and some of them might be graduating this May. So any final thoughts that you may have?
Yeah, I would say again, just be inquisitive, be bold, stay engaged with what's going on around you. Really don't get discouraged, try to have thick skin. Eventually it will break through, right? If you're looking for a job, all it takes is one yes. And sometimes it's not the place that you thought it was going to be, but you don't know what you're going to experience when you get there. Like I said before, it's tough when you're aiming at places that everybody wants to go to. Everybody wants to graduate from college and they want to go to a place that everybody's heard of before. Augusta, Georgia, Myrtle Beach, Albany, New York, Buffalo, New York, all of that. There's a lot of people that are competing for those jobs, right? And, you may find that you go to a place like Salisbury, Maryland, which is a pretty small market, that you have a great experience there. You learn a whole bunch of things. You learn how to really get good in this business, and you've got a good foundation or to move on to that next level. So don't be afraid to fall. Don't be afraid to fail. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Try not to do any mistakes that are critical to your career, but definitely, you're going to run into some issues, and that's okay. That's natural. Try to avoid getting discouraged, and just, stay with it. It could be a really, really fun career. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the television news business. And I've been hearing that since, I was first starting out. I mean, I couldn't tell you the amount of times that I was an intern and I was told this business is dying, this business is dying, this business is dying. You should go into sales, you should go into advertising. What are you doing? You're wasting your time. You shouldn't get involved in this and whatnot. 10 years later, I'm still in it. Televisions haven't gotten smaller, and we're still doing the news. And we learned during the presidential election how important news is in 2016 and in 2020. We learned during the pandemic how important news is, right? The information, the engagement that our local officials and our government officials and our state officials had to be with providing us with information. We learned from doctors, we've learned from people that were going through experiences that we were all having to go through together, and what that means and where we go from there. So I guess the biggest way to wrap it up is just stay with it. Stay with it, have fun with it. If it isn't for you, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. But I'm telling you, you can have a great time. You can really learn. Even if everything seems like it's falling apart, you get a front row seat to what's happening. You get to see what's going on and you get to inform people. And it's a career like nothing else I've experienced.
That's great. That's absolutely great. So I think we are just about out of time. So should students follow you on Instagram or LinkedIn, or what would be the best thing to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to connect on any of those social media pages, I mean, if they want to find me on LinkedIn or whatnot, they could do that as well. I know that with my Instagram, a lot of the Instagram stuff that I post are just like pictures of trips that I go on and things like that. I don't do a lot of news stuff on there. Twitter is where I primarily do news stuff. If you want to see what's happening in terms of the San Francisco Bay Area and what I'm reporting on or what our station's reporting on, just go to cron4.com. If people want to follow me on Facebook, they can do that as well. But if they want to connect professionally, LinkedIn's probably the best place to go, or reach out to me via email, dthorn@cron4.com. And I'll try to help you out any way I can.
Again, thank you so much. So much amazing advice. I love when an alum come back and share their thoughts and insight into what they do. Marwa, great work. Marwa as well.
Thank you, Dan, for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Also for me as well as everyone else here, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So thank you.
Hopefully I got to everybody. I don't know if there was any other questions. Hopefully I got to everybody.
That was everything. Yeah. So, I want to thank everybody that joined us today. Some really great questions. And again, we covered a lot of topics and a lot of insight, like I said. So I hope this this makes it helps students make an informed decision about broadcast journalism for sure. So thank you, everyone. I'm here at the Magner Center, so you have my email. You can make an appointment to meet with me and discuss more. And Dan, like I said, thank you so very much. We really truly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, happy to help. Yeah, and take advantage of the Magner Center. It's a great place.
Yeah. No, it's we try to help as much as we can. So enjoy the rest of the afternoon, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, Dan.
Make sure to check out the My Career tab on the BC Navigator app, where you can track your career progress based on the amount of credits you've earned, stay updated on upcoming events from the Magner Center, and watch our videos for insight and advice on your career field.